What really happened with your host, Mike Rivero, putting America first, second, and third. Here is your host, Michael Rivero.
And we're back online here. Let me make sure that all the things are lighting up on this end. Probably would help if I turned on the archive recording system here. There we go. All right, and we're back up and live. All right, so welcome to our show. Sorry for the very, very rough start here. We do try and be professional out here, but we are basically, we're the front line on the revolution for the future of America. We're trying to stop a war, and, the liars and the propagandists and the paid corporate media selling you the war and everything, they've got all the money and the high tech and everything, and we're kind of making do with spit and baling wire out here. So please bear with us as we try and deal with our technology. And this is probably a follow-on. I'm going to give a little personal rant here. This morning, my wife's phone in the office next door died, and I went down to Office Depot to try and get a replacement phone. And all we needed was just a little two-line phone with a headphone jack, buttons to call out, and something to answer the call, and that's it. And every single phone down there is decadent, and by that I mean there are all kinds of buttons and rocker switches and digital menus and something called poof and something called foosh and something called and all this built-in technology, which is usually the first thing to fail and that we never use anyway. And I kept asking the guy in the store, all I need is a phone to make phone calls. I'm not flying the space shuttle from this control console here. And it seems to me that American corporate mentality, or certainly the retail mentality, seems to think that the more buttons they can put on something, the less likely we are to notice how unreliable it is, how often we're having to buy and replace something, or maybe that's the idea. We're not going to make this last because you're going to want to come back here in 6 months and buy another telephone with even more buttons on it than it had before. And I like gadgets. Don't get me wrong. I like gadgets and stuff. But some things I like to be kept really, really simple. And the idea that I can't find a telephone that is just a telephone anymore really annoys me. One thing that should concern all of us is that with only one exception, every one of these telephones I was looking at this morning is a cordless handset. Ooh, convenient. But, they're worried about radio waves in our brain. But more than that, the courts in the United States of America have ruled consistently that because it is technically a public broadcast, the police can listen to your phone calls on a cordless handset without a warrant. Because they're not coming into your home, they're not tapping your line. You're broadcasting what you're saying to the world, and they can listen to what it is. And we know the FBI has been given these new authorities to go through your trash can without a warrant. So if you're doing something the FBI is curious about, they can sit outside with a scanner in the car and listen to your little, cordless telephone handsets. Everything that's cordless, keyboards, your computer mouse, everything is sending messages out to the home, or out of your home, out to the street, basically broadcasting everything that you're doing. And I think that's really definitely a direction we don't want to go. I want to go back to a world of wires. I want a wire between my keyboard and the computer, because what I'm typing on there is really only my business. I want a cord between the telephone and the telephone base, because I don't want somebody with a scanner down the street listening into my phone calls. And I know that really does happen, because, I know they're supposed to be encrypted now, but the encryption is really very, very weak. It's very, very easy to break if somebody wants to basically be eavesdropping on what you're doing, which these days, of course, is the government itself. All right, enough of the personal rant about technology and all the rest of that stuff here. Phone lines are open, 877-342-6673, 877-342-6673. Brett's in the control room, twiddling the dials, keeping us out of trouble. It is Tuesday, June 14th, 2011. I didn't get that at the beginning of the show. During hour number 2, during the first 2 segments of hour number 2, we're going to have an interview with Steve Lendman, author, fellow radio host, economic wizard. We pre-recorded that the other day in his very, very busy schedule. We'll be playing that in the first part of hour number 2. But let's go to the phones right now. John from California. Aloha, John. Welcome to the show. What is on your mind?
Hey, Mike. Thanks for taking my call. I appreciate it. I was listening to your show yesterday, and I heard you mention the Israelis were basically selling, I believe it was F-35s to China. Is that right?
F-15.
F-15 fighter jets.
Now, the official story is that they just went missing. They got stolen. Oh, my goodness, they were here just a minute ago, and then they're gone, and now they're showing up in China.
Right. So, basically what we have here is just another example of our greatest ally and the only democracy in the Middle East, basically stealing our, military technology, engaging in espionage and selling it to anybody all over the world. Just another example of this, stabbing in the back by the Israelis. And then, we're watching the GOP debate the other night, and we got this guy, I think it's Herman Cain is one of the guys running for president on the Republican ticket. And this guy's sitting up there talking about how he, doesn't want any Muslims in his cabinet, and how we gotta, investigate Arabs and all this nonsense, when the only people that need to be investigated are these Jews that are basically selling and stealing all our technology and engaging in all this espionage and selling it, to foreign powers all over the world. So I just wanted to comment on that. The second thing I wanted to comment on, I know you've been talking about this fraud gay Syrian blogger, and it just sort of reminded me of when the Tunisian uprising began. It was sort of based on this idea of, this street vendor getting hassled and pushed and bullied around by this government bureaucrat. And it actually was reported in mainstream news that this was an entire hoax. It was another fraud. The media basically made it up. And, I'm reading the New York Times, and they're having this, 4 or 5 page expose about this fraudulent story that was used to, justify this Tunisian revolution. So that just sort of came to mind when I heard you report on the gay Syrian blogger.
Well, they've caught another one. They've caught another one. Another one of these supposed lesbian bloggers in Damascus has been exposed as a fraud. That's 2 of them now. And as far as Israel spying, the Egypt just arrested an Israeli spy. Turns out he's an American. Turns out he was involved in that pipeline bombing that they were trying to blame on the revolution. And, Israel never knows when to quit. They just got Egypt to go back to that deal of selling low-priced gas to Israel, and then Egypt finds this spy in their midst basically trying to cause trouble. So, now Egypt is saying they're either going to raise the price on the gas back to fair market value, or they're going to shut it off altogether. And, of course, Israel's saying, you can't do that. You're supposed to give us your gas for below market price. We get it wholesale. It's always – and everybody's screaming and they're pointing fingers back and forth. But, yeah, Israel got caught with another spy. And I'll tell you this right now. Egypt is not going to be as gentle with Israeli spies they catch as the United States was with those 3 Mossad agents they arrested on 9/11, for cheering and high-fiving and saying, yes, is it wonderful? And, the U.S. held them for a little while and then got them out of the country as fast as they could because too many people were asking, just what is that evidence that linked these Mossad agents to 9/11 that the U.S. government felt they had to classify?
Right, and all those news stories by Carl Kamen suddenly disappeared from Fox News. One more comment about this American-Israeli guy. He was actually going into Libya to assist in the organization of the rebel forces over there. So it's just this sort of black ops they got going on all over in these, these revolutions taking over the Muslim world, we're told. And it's really these, sort of black ops teams going in there and creating all this mayhem and causing bombings and things like that.
They're not creating it. They're infiltrating it to try and take it over and redirect it and hijack it.
Right.
Yeah. So
exactly.
Yeah. Okay. So that's basically what's going on there.
I'll tell you what. I'll let you go. Enjoy the show and take care. Aloha, America.
All right, thanks an awful lot, and thank you for the call. Yeah, these revolutions are, for the most part, very real expressions of the unhappiness of the people of the world with these governments that have sold them into the bondage of the International Monetary Fund. You go to all of these things, especially in Greece, and you will see signs, IMF, get out. And so as these revolutions start to happen, the money junkies don't really care who's running the country as long as whoever's running the country works for them. So as these revolutions start to happen, they send in their spies and infiltrators and expert. And I have no idea what that was. They send in their spies and then infiltrators. All right, we got to take a break for commercials, and we will be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show here, and I apologize for all of our technical glitches. Maybe it's that giant solar flare that's out there, although I'm more inclined to think it is the decline of America's communication infrastructure because the government can't be bothered on spending money to make sure the Internet and the telephone lines are actually working reliably because, if we spend money on the American people, the terrorists will have won. You might be surprised to find out that the United States, even though we supposedly led the revolution in home computers and internet in the home, that we, in point of fact, do not have the best internet service in the world by quite a wide margin. Over in Asia, they have, gigabit delivery into the home now. It's all gone optical. And here in the United States of America, our internet quality of service is just falling way, way, way behind. It's another classic example where the U.S. will make the effort to do something wonderful, technological achievement, and then they'll just quit and say, well, we showed the world that we're really cool and we're just going to sit on our gluteus maximi and pretend that we're still great. The space program is a good example. Second into space after the Soviet Union, first man on the moon. We are one shuttle launch away from not having a manned space program any longer. Everybody else is up there playing around. But our technological prowess in space has been sacrificed on the altar of the money junkies. And I am very, very annoyed about it. So we're going to bear with the technical issues, and maybe it's solar flares or whatnot. I think it is just the poor quality of the telephone system in the United States of America, and it's only going to get worse from here. Besides, the U.S. government doesn't want to do anything to improve the Internet. They want the Internet to go away. And if it starts just breaking down, they can say, oh, heavens, it's not our fault the Internet doesn't. It's not our fault you can't get to whatreallyhappened.com anymore. It's the hackers. And it's corrosion. Corrosion is not your friend. All right, getting off this stuff. I want to get on to the economy here. There are some new developments there. Now, the stock market did go up today. Remember what I said a couple of days ago about how Bernanke had just printed up a bunch of spendable cash and bought back a lot of that Chinese debt? And the Chinese were probably constrained to come in and spend that money here to try and drive assets up to make the economy look good again. We certainly saw it on the stock market today. But the stock market does not just explode upward like that on the productivity of America's factories and manufacturing. It's not there. It is exploding upward because it's being manipulated. It's being gamed. It's being, played with speculative games. The stock market is supposed to represent the productivity of the nation in a way that ordinary citizens can participate in. But when the price of the stock is disconnected from the value, you're back in those gambling games that Glass-Steagall was supposed to prevent and was repealed. Now, according to PIMCO's Bill Gross, he's been out there with some very accurate, albeit very alarming warnings about what's going on in the United States. He is saying that the United States national debt, when you add everything together, the unfunded liabilities, the cost of the Wall Street bailout, the cost of the wars, the cost of Israel, when you total it all up of what the U.S. government owes versus what they're able to actually pay off right now, it has hit the $100 trillion mark. We are in far worse financial shape than Greece is, and the Greek people are in the streets screaming for the government to step down and for the IMF to leave. Where are the American people? We need to go Cairo on the Federal Reserve because they are destroying the nation. They're destroying the lives of the American people, all to put some more of those little gold glittery things in their pockets. Remember, we're dealing with addictive behavior. It's like if you have a cocaine or a heroin addict in your home and you say, please stop stealing the money from the cookie jar for your drugs, and they say, I'm sorry, I won't do it again. And then they do it again. And, of course, you expect that to happen. They're addicts. And that's what we have here in the Federal Reserve. They're money junkies. They're hopelessly addicted to other people's money. They can't stop themselves. We need an intervention. We must save them from themselves. And certainly we need to save ourselves and our future generations from their enslavement and their greed. Now, over in Press TV, they're doing a really careful analysis where basically at this point, the consensus out there in the alternative media and the rest of the world is that the United States government and economy is toast. It's just looking for a place to fall down. And over on Press TV, they've got a very good analysis that says basically the United States economy has failed due to military arrogance. This idea that even though the U.S. is broke and unable to pay their bills, that they can solve their problems by going out and flinging bombs in every direction. And as I said, it has worked twice before. The crash of 1907, was dealt with World War I. The crash of 1929 was dealt with World War II. Now we're in the crash of 2007, and look, how many wars we've got going. And that's where we are right now. But it's not going to work this time because we don't have the manufacturing, we don't have the economic might, and we certainly don't have the boots on the ground to go out there and win these wars. We are on a path to the destruction of the United States of America by one of three different methods. The U.S. government is going to lose this world war that they're in the midst of trying to get kicked off, or they're simply going to collapse and go broke the way the USSR did, which is my preferred solution, or the American people are finally going to wake up from whatever it is they're putting in the tap water to keep us tranquilized down, and we're going to do what the Egyptians did and the Icelanders did and the Greeks are trying to do, which is throw the bankers who wrecked the economy in prison and fire and then prosecute the government that helped them to do it. And when they talk about the arrogance that has led the United States into this economic disaster, certainly that is economic arrogance as well. We had this Wall Street generation of MBAs who grew up without any respect for manufacturing or the products that were being made. Products were something you made to get those first few chips so you could play in the great game on Wall Street. And we lost our respect for manufactured goods. We lost our respect for people who could manufacture goods. And American quality of manufacturing tumbled. Big surprise. And that's why we're in the mess we're in right now. We're going to take a break. We'll be back after these commercials, 877-342-6673. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show here. I'm going to try and rush along. We've got a lot of stuff to get through today, and we've got the Steve Lindman interview coming up here at the top of the hour. There is concern being raised that the European Central Bank may already be technically insolvent. They're basically loaning out and loaning out and loaning out this instantly created money. It's basically the European version of the Federal Reserve. And they may not really have the resources to keep doing this without triggering massive inflation all over Europe. We're seeing a lot of the individual national banks, member banks, start to basically break away from ECB control. There was an article over the weekend where the Bank of France was almost leading the herd, if you will, in basically abandoning these plans to bail out these countries like Greece that are completely mired in this manufactured debt. So we might be looking at the beginning of the breakup of the European Union, at least within the banking cartel itself. And, of course, for the globalists, this would be a tremendous setback. The globalists' goal is to have one world and one private central bank issuing debt-based currency so that we're all perpetually, permanently enslaved to this inherited debt. If the globalists get their way, 500 years from now, children will be born and said, we're sorry, but your ancestors ran up about $22 million in debt, and here's the job you will work with at your entire life to try and pay off your small portion of it. Remember the ballad of John Henry? 16 Tons. The song 16 Tons was made famous by Tennessee Ernie Ford, and it talks about just this heavy, physical, toiling labor all day long, and you can't quit because you owe your soul to the company store. This was a reference to a very abusive practice that was, in fact, taking place during the last Depression, where corporations that were involved in various operations would literally build their own towns out in the middle of nowhere. And they would lure people to come work there with promises of very, very high wages. And people would move there with their families, only to discover that all the housing and all of the food stores and all of the clothing stores and everything were owned by the company, and the prices there were always so high that you would be driven deeper and deeper into debt, and you were not allowed to leave the company town until you could pay your debt off, which of course was impossible. By design, it was a means of enslavement. And the fact that you had money in your pocket and you were able to buy things that you wanted did not reduce the fact that it was a system designed to trap and enslave people into this incredible, crushing labor. Just the fact that you're being given these pretty printed pieces of paper does not mean you're a free citizen. They had printed paper money in the slave labor camps of Nazi Germany. Most people don't know. They had theaters and bordellos inside the slave labor camps where, after making all of this material for the Nazi war effort, they give you a few of these pretty printed tickets, and you could go to a theater production, or you could go to the bordello, or you could go to the bookstore. They had bookstores there. It was, this little community inside. It's a perfect model of the company town. And what the globalists are trying to do is have a company planet owned by the corporations. The bank is owned by the corporations. Everything that you eat, drink, wear, your housing is all sold to you by the corporations to keep you permanently as a debt slave so that you will spend your life working as hard as you can to build temples and pyramids and monuments to the glory of the money junkies. And that's what the plan here is. They're trying to build one government, one central bank. And if the European Union falls apart, it will be a major, major blow to this dream of standing on top of it all and say, I'm the king of the world. And then the iceberg hits. And it may look good to the globalists as they try and sell you the idea, think of the advantages of a one world government. I can't think of any. Every time I hear the phrase one world government, I keep remembering that that's what Alexander the Great wanted. And that's what the Roman Caesars wanted. And that's what Napoleon wanted. And that's what Hitler wanted. They all wanted a one world government with themselves at the top. And it was great for the people who were at the top and those who were aiding them, but for everybody else it was kind of a really raw deal. When you talk about Alexander the Great and, wasn't he wonderful? He conquered the entire world. He killed a lot of people. He burned a lot of cities. He caused a lot of damage. I don't think this guy is all that great. Not to me. Not to the people who got in the way of his dreams of imperial global glory. And the same certainly is true now. Look at the devastation being spread across the world, either economically, such as we see here in the United States of America, or militarily in all these countries that are being invaded and conquered to force a private central bank down their throats. I'm sure the globalists go to sleep at night with visions of glory and gold statues to their everlasting honor in their minds, but to the rest of us just trying to get by and take care of our families, this is not a very good deal. So they're trying to basically pyramid up this debt scheme, and the problem is there's no way to pay off this debt. There never was. By design, private central banks and debt-based currencies, by design, simply pile up the debt to the point where there's going to be a collapse. And it's happening right now. All right, I didn't mean to go off on that rant. I know you've heard me say that many, many times before, but it is so important people understand as they struggle to keep their homes and businesses. You guys didn't do anything wrong. This is not your fault. You did not do anything. It was done to you, and you need to understand that and accept it, and you need to get angry. Hate gets a really bad rep. We're always saying on TV, you shouldn't hate. It's destructive. You learn your anger management. Keep serene. No. To heck with anger management. I'm pissed off, and I have a reason to be. And so do you. The Icelanders got angry. They got their country back. The Egyptians got angry. They got their country back. The Greeks are getting angry. They're going to get their country back. And you will not get your country back until you get angry enough to kick the money junkies out of our government building, down the steps, hard enough to bounce in the street 3 times, followed by a good tarring and feathering, because after all, that's traditional in the United States of America. All righty, New York Appellate Court, in the case of Bank of New York versus Silverberg, has ruled that the Mortgage Electronic Registration System, MERS, does not have the right to foreclose on a mortgage in default, and does not have the legal right to assign that right to anyone else if it does not have the underlying promissory note. Now, this is a major, major blow to the foreclosure mills, because they set up that whole mortgage electronic registration system to evade title transfer fees, basically it's tax evasion, and to just fling the titles back and forth so fast that they could game the system and bubble them up. We know that Bear Stearns was pledging multiple mortgages into multiple investment packages, which is criminal felony fraud. I don't know why they're not wearing handcuffs. And MERS was basically at the center of this firestorm of foreclosures, taking people's homes in order to recapitalize the banks after they were forced to buy back all the fraudulent mortgage-backed securities. And now the courts are saying MERS doesn't really have the right to foreclose if they don't have the actual note. The promissory note. So if you are in trouble and they're trying to take your home, you go out there and you say, you show me the promissory note. Because if you've disconnected the mortgage from the promissory note, you do not have the right to foreclose. You're going to have to fight to keep your homes because the money junkies need those homes. They don't care about that mortgage payment. That won't help them save themselves from jail. They need your entire home on their balance sheets right now. We're going to take a break for commercials. We'll be right back.
We will not go down in the night without a fight. You can burn up our mosques and our homes and our schools, but our spirit will never die. We will not go down in Gaza tonight.
And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. We seem to have a nice, good sound connection here, so please, everybody around the world, don't touch anything. Don't touch the wires. Don't touch your mouse. Don't touch your keyboard. We're just barely holding all of this stuff together here right now. All right, getting back to the economy real quick. Ben Bernanke, or as I like to call him, Ben Voldemort, is out there screaming that if Congress does not confidence in the American economy. Okay, somebody touched a wire. We went away there for a second. So Ben Bernanke is saying if Congress doesn't raise the debt ceiling, it will harm investors' confidence in the economy. Personally, I would think the inability of the United States government to get its spending under control and at least hold the debt at a constant level is going to destroy investors' confidence in the economy. At this point, I can't imagine anybody with any brains having any confidence in the American economy. I think anybody who's still in there investing in the United States and the United States government, they're going to go on investing no matter how bad things get because they're in denial or they're on drugs or they just have a lot of spare cash lying around that they don't know what else to do with. You could send donations to whatreallyhappened.com, but that's a side issue entirely. But this idea that investor confidence in the U.S. is going to be boosted by plunging the nation and its people further into debt, I don't see how that could build confidence unless the investor's goal is permanent debt, servitude, and slavery for the American people. So, all right, getting away from the economy and into politics. As you know, Ron Paul was on this debate over at Fox, this first GOP debate, and it's rather amazing to see the disparity in the reporting after the situation, because CNN basically came on and said, well, you know, I think who they were pushing, but they had this TV display where they said Ron Paul got 0% in the after-debate poll that ran among GOP insiders, okay, which was rather amazing because Ron Paul won Anderson Cooper's Facebook page poll. Anytime there's a poll where the people can just log in and do it and make a pick, it's Ron Paul. But then you have the corporate media coming out and said, well, we conducted our own poll of GOP insiders, and they said, yes, you should all love, I think it was Mitt Romney. And Ron Paul got 0. So they're doing the same thing to him again now that they did in 2008. The media is just absolutely dead certain that they are going to keep Ron Paul from running. You guys are just not smart enough to pick your own candidates. You have to let the media pick the candidates because that's what we get paid all the big bucks for, or something like that. And I noticed, Ron Paul was out there expressing a concern about the gold in Fort Knox. And this is a valid concern, I might add. And he wants an audit, and of course everybody is apoplectic. The Treasury is saying, no, you can't audit the gold in Fort Knox. We just had the carpets cleaned. It'll cost too much money. We just got it all stacked in a whole new pretty pattern, and we don't want to unstack it. And they're just going totally ballistic on this thing. And the media is out there describing Ron Paul as this reactionary, radical, kooky. He's just pandering to conspiracy theorists who think that the gold bars in Fort Knox are fake. And there is a legitimate reason to think so, because gold bars bearing the hallmarks of Fort Knox have been detected in Europe with tungsten cores in the middle. And the scam is very, very obvious. Back right after John F. Kennedy got killed, the silver coins in circulation at the time, the silver coins that put the value of the money in the control of the American people, were taken out of circulation and they were replaced with these slugs, these junk pieces of junk metal that were plated to look like they were still silver, but they weren't. But as long as the American people could be brainwashed into thinking that these were still the same kind of coins, the system would go on working, and the money junkies had all the silver to play with. And now somebody, somewhere, we don't know who, but somebody can be, as long as people can be tricked into believing those gold bars are real, the system will go on working. But it's still a fraud. Now, I think about a year ago, I proposed on the air, and it's subsequently been adopted in Europe, that you can test a gold bar for a tungsten core very easily. You don't have to drill into it. It doesn't have to be destructive. Just take one of those little hospital ultrasound machines that they use to see the babies. And all you got to do is just put it on that bar. And if there is a disparity in the metals between the tungsten and the gold, you will see the outline of the tungsten core. And you can just go in there and just start spot checking gold bars until you find one that has a tungsten core. And then you start tarring and feathering everybody. But Ron Paul is absolutely right and reasonable to wonder if there is still the nation's gold supply inside Fort Knox, because we know the government has been cheating on the books about unemployment. We know the Federal Reserve has been trying to get as much gold bullion as they can. Our government is in a position of wanting to spend its gold and have it too. And the gold in Fort Knox may be nothing more than a giant theater piece, an illusion, a stage set to convince the American people they still collectively have some wealth, when the real wealth of the country has already been transferred into the pockets of the private bankers, which is what the Federal Reserve System is designed to do. All right, moving right along. We already mentioned during the phone call a second supposedly lesbian girl persecuted in Damascus, Syria, has turned out to be a guy. Straight guy from the United States, Bill Graber, 58, U.S. Air Force veteran. Apparently he's one of the editors of the Let's Get Real Lesbian blog, which is where these comments posted from Amina Araf, who was really Tom McMaster, were being posted. It's all a fraud. It's all a fake. Syria is the next target for the war hawks and the money junkies, and they're setting up all these little phony little stories to tug at your heartstrings. Oh, those gosh darn Syrians. They're being so mean to the lesbian girls. We've got to just go kill them all. Let's see. Now, they arrested a new spy in Egypt. We mentioned that. He was involved in that pipeline blast. We talked about that. Let me skip on down here. All right. As you are probably aware, there is a new flotilla going to Gaza in a couple of weeks. It is a repeat of the aid flotilla from last year and will probably wind up being treated the same way. Israel is going around trying to find governments who will say, no, you may not sail to Gaza to take them food and medicine, because that's a provocation. See, this is the way Israel thinks. Israel starves Gaza to get them to surrender their elected government and accept proxy Israeli rule through Fatah. Basically, it's the same thing the Soviet Union tried to do to West Berlin back in 1948, 1949. Same exact thing. Starve them, and they will basically give up their government and accept our rule. And back then, the world said, no, that's really not a fair way to play. But for some reason today, most of the world turns a blind eye when Israel does the same thing to Gaza. So people are sending these boats with building supplies, school supplies, toys for the kids, candies, cookies, medicine, and food. That's what was on board the flotilla a year ago. School supplies, toys, food, candy, medical supplies, stuff they need just to live. And Israel said, this is a provocation. You are provoking us. And they attacked the flotilla and they killed a bunch of people. And it looks like they may do the same thing again, because Israel can never back down and admit they're wrong. If they let this flotilla through, it's basically admitting they were wrong to stop the previous flotilla from getting through. So Israel is trapped by their own arrogance and their self-image of infallibility and perfection. They're going to have to try and stop this flotilla, and it's a lot more boats. And the world is not going to be very forgiving if more people are killed trying to take cookies to the children of Gaza. Now, Israel's still out there screaming, well, they're threatening us. They're throwing the cookies over the wall, and they're hitting our dog, and all this other stuff. And they're always screaming about missiles and rockets and stuff, but it's not really happening. It's not really happening. McClatchy News already published official Israeli documents saying the goal of the starvation blockade is to force the Gazans to abandon Hamas, who won the election of 2006, and accept Israeli proxy rule through Fatah. And so we're heading to another confrontation. And by the way, I'll tell you right now, if the Israelis murder more Americans, the U.S. government will do absolutely nothing about it. Because President Pussy is owned by Israel. He's their little White House boy. And he will do nothing about it. Can you imagine, after the attack on Pearl Harbor, if President Roosevelt had gone up to the Congress and say, guys, really, the Japanese had a really good reason for killing our people and those ships at Pearl Harbor, because we were kind of a threat to what they were doing over there in China. Which is kind of Israel's excuse. Yeah, we attacked those aid ships because they're a threat to what we were doing in Gaza. That was their excuse. Can you imagine what would have happened if Roosevelt had gone to Congress and said, let's cut the Japanese some slack here on this Pearl Harbor thing, because they had a really good reason to do what they did? He wouldn't have stayed president very much longer. Alrighty, let's see. The carbon market. I've been talking about the carbon Nazis are out there trying to sell global warming, and apparently the carbon credit market has crashed. People were buying into carbon credits because they thought it was going to be the new bubble. It was going to be the new, like what Enron did with electricity to California, or what the real estate company was doing with real estate. It was going to be a big bubble, and the people in and out first would make a lot of money. That market has crashed. So this big money-making scheme called human-caused global warming has been buried under all of this record-setting snow that we have here. Final comment before we go to the break here. Remember how I talked about a lot of these things you were being sold for environmentalism were not really thought well through? We talked about how ethanol was not actually carbon neutral, was damaging the car's fuel systems that it was in, did not provide as much energy as gasoline, so you had to buy and burn more of it to do the same amount of work. Now they're finding out that if you factor in the carbon footprint of manufacturing these exotic high-tech batteries, electric cars are more polluting than gasoline-powered equivalents. It just happens all at once when they're being made. Huge amounts of chemicals and toxins released into the environment to make these very exotic batteries. So again, it sounds good, and it sounds like the way to go until you realize it wasn't really thought all the way through. It's just another product sold to you under a green flag. We'll be back with the interview with Steve Lindman after the news break. And joining us on the air today is Stephen Lindman, who is an author. He's also a fellow radio host over at Progressive Radio. He's written a large number of books, one of which was How Wall Street Fleeced America. And, Stephen, obviously, at this particular time in our junction, as the economy continues to deteriorate and debt continues to pile up, we're looking at China's rating agencies saying that the United States is already in default. Fitch's warning of junk bond status on U.S. Treasuries. One of the European agencies just now lowered our rating from AAA to AA. It does look like we're sort of in the final throes of this failed experiment called the Federal Reserve. What does the economic world look like from where you're sitting?
Oh, it looks dismal, Michael. One correction to what you said. This will be my second book, called How Wall Street Fleeces America, privatized banking, government collusion, and class war. It'll be published in September. My only other book was called The Iraq Quagmire a few years ago, The Price of Imperial Arrogance. And I'm obsessed with imperial wars. I'm obsessed with the Federal Reserve, which is nothing more than a Wall Street tool. It's a private organization controlled entirely by the big banking interests that own shares of the Federal Reserve. And as Ron Paul likes to say, it's neither federal nor does it have reserves, so it's been printing money with abandon. Well, I think at this point, Michael, it has no choice, because the Chinese and others are getting fed up with the junk paper that America is putting out. U.S. Treasuries wants the gold standard of death. You buy a Treasury bill or a Treasury note, a bond, and it's thought of as nothing safer in the world. My goodness, you could almost state on them, "In God we trust." You're guaranteed to get your money back. Well, I think for the time being you are, but they're turning more and more into junk the more money the Fed produces. And at the same time, I have people on my program who say, if the Fed does not keep printing money to buy these treasuries because other buyers are not showing up so readily, including China, including Japan, and the most recent number I heard was that of the treasury issuances, something like 20% are being bought by outsiders, so the Fed literally has to buy the rest, and the alternative stated by an economist on my program was, if they don't do it, the economy will collapse. That's a pretty dire statement to make.
Well, you know, we seem to be in this very bizarre situation, excuse me, where the federal government is printing up treasury certificates that are worthless, and the Federal Reserve is buying them with Federal Reserve notes, which are equally worthless, and it seems like they're trying to conceal within this double swap the fact that they're just sort of declaring the money to be in existence out of thin air. I know there's currently a lawsuit against the Federal Reserve Bank of Atlanta on the basis that since 2000, the Federal Reserve has not offered to redeem the issued Federal Reserve notes as it's required to do by law. So there's a lawsuit pending under that situation. But it does seem like the United States is basically throwing a rope into the air and then trying to climb up that rope, and then once it's on the top of the rope, pull the rope up and throw it up again. And there's just really nothing underneath it. And I think the big question on everybody's mind is, how long can they possibly keep this charade going? How long before it's simply going to start working, or rather stop working? And I think the reason for that is all of these treasury bills that the U.S. government issues are redeemed in the labor of the American people. And the American people are willing to work hard, but when the government basically encouraged corporations to offshore the high-paying jobs, and that came out of the need to recapitalize the banks after the mortgage-backed security fraud, it seems the U.S. government cut its own throat with regard to the treasuries because it literally took away its own ability to redeem those treasury bills.
Oh, absolutely. You raise an important question that nobody has an answer to, but I'll take a stab without a timetable. When will this game end? This is a dirty game that is wrecking the country. It is harming people all over the world, including Americans. It is stealing the future of Americans. This is not the country that I grew up in, Michael, back in the 40s and 50s. When I talk of myself as an inner city kid who went to a high school that no longer exists and hasn't for many years. In fact, all the schools I went to in inner city Boston no longer exist. And there virtually are no good inner city schools, with exceptions along the way, and Chicago has them too. But for every good one, you've got dozens that absolutely are worthless. They ought to just shut them down. Either teach or shut these things down, because kids come out of these schools whenever they leave them, when they graduate, when they don't graduate, they come out illiterate. If that's what schools produce, illiterates, you can see the kind of country we're heading for. But again, this ordinary inner city kid at these type of schools back then got me into two top colleges, one for undergraduate, one for my graduate degree, and probably in this country they don't get any better than the ones I went to. That is impossible today, impossible. So my thought on when this thing will end, well, either it'll collapse under its own weight at some point, and I have no idea when that will be, or when the U.S. public finally wakes up to the reality I know about well, and I write about it, and I'm very outspoken about it, and they finally decide that my own government is screwing me. They are telling me they're there to represent me, but they're not. They're screwing me. They're killing me. They're destroying my future. Unless I do something about this, it'll only get worse, and then everything will be gone, and the jackboots will be in the street. This is a theme I repeat over and over again. I don't believe in violence. I don't believe in shooting the bastards, but I sure believe in their face activism and a little civil disobedience. As a matter of fact, a lot of civil disobedience is very fine. That's how we got civil rights. That's how we got labor rights. That's how women got the right to vote. That's how we ended slavery in this country. At one time, all of those things were thought to be impossible, but they happened. We literally can have good government if we on our own go out and work for it. And if we don't, I'll tell you what we're going to get. We're going to get despotism, because we're mostly along the way toward it right now, and it's only a matter of time until it's as bad as it is in the worst despotic states, with working people in America being nothing more than serfs. You either go to work for Walmart's or McDonald's in most cases, or you join the military, and there's nothing in between. All the jobs that were open to me when I got out of school, and there was a whole array of them that I was able to do, and I had a decent life because of it. Mm-hmm. That's all swept away and gone, unless you happen to come from a well-off family, getting more and more a rich family, and that's a very small percent of people in the country. That's not the America that the people who run this country want people to believe, Michael, but that's the truth.
No, that's absolutely true. And by the way, I'm from Boston originally myself, and I'm a farm kid from New England. But I'm absolutely in agreement with you. I'm leaning toward eventual collapse like the USSR, mostly because I think violence in the streets is counterproductive. But there is a growing move for a national general strike, because if the rest of the world sees that the American people are going to refuse to work to pay off those treasury bills, or to simply make good on bad investments in this country, then I think the whole thing's going to come apart. We're coming up on the end of this first segment here, but I find myself very much in accord with your views. I do not think the United States can survive much longer, and it's already mutated into something that I do not recognize from my own upbringing and my own youth in the country I thought I was living in. Certainly, when we see people like Dominique Strauss-Kahn attacking hotel maids and Representative Wiener sending pictures of himself to porn stars, we begin to understand the arrogance of power and the reality that our financial and political elites do not see us as respectable human beings. They lie to us, they use us, we're being managed. We are being treated like chattel property, like serfs or indentured servants. And you're absolutely right, this incredible debt that has been manufactured out of thin air, just like the money, by the Federal Reserve. It is a burden not just on us, but on our future generations. And if our children are born into debt, and they're told you will work your entire life to pay this off and you have no choice in the matter, then where's the freedom in the land of the free? Whereas, we're basically making our future generations slaves by refusing to stand up to the abuse of the Federal Reserve. President Woodrow Wilson, when he signed the bill that created the Federal Reserve, said, I have unwittingly ruined my own country. And all of his concerns he expressed almost 100 years ago have certainly come to pass. All right, we'll be right back after these words from our sponsors.
Aloha, America. Welcome back to our show. We're still on the phone with Steve Lindeman, author, talk show radio host, and fellow Bostonian. And Steve, in this last segment here, we need to understand, how do we bring this corrupted, obviously serving the rich system, certainly never intended by the founders of the United States of America. They fought a war to be free of private central banking, and we've had 3 of these things reimposed on us, and all 3 have nearly destroyed the nation. How do we bring this to an end in an era where we have no leaders who have the strength of purpose and the moral courage of, say, an Andrew Jackson or an Abraham Lincoln or a John F. Kennedy, without spilling vast amounts of blood in the streets of America?
Well, in the last segment, Michael, you named it General Strike. Talk about an effective nonviolent tool. We literally could shut the whole country down with a general strike. The best recent example I know was the glorious public workers in Wisconsin that almost shut the entire state down for a month. But the energy waned and it's gone. Although I'm told by somebody who lives in Madison, Wisconsin, the capital, that the epicenter of what was going on was that there are stirrings to get this thing back in gear again, to go after this fascist Republican-run government in Wisconsin.
Apparently there was a protest the other day there, and the police were literally, clubbing the protesters and then taking all the camcorders. They arrested reporters who were trying to cover it. So, we're in this very much strike breaker, a brutal mentality, and seize the camcorders so nobody can report it. I think more is going on in Madison than we're aware of, especially if you're dependent on corporate media to find out what's happening.
We have to emulate the people. I think who are the most courageous I know at this moment are the Yemeni people. And in an article I'm writing today, I'm writing about Yemen. I've done it before, and I'm doing it again today as part of a broader article. And the Yemeni people, since January, have defied the despotic regime that's run by that country, backed by Washington, backed by the Pentagon. Hundreds of people have been killed. Many hundreds more have been hurt, and they will not back down. They want to be rid of this regime, and they come out every single day, many thousands of them, all over the country. Yemen is a much smaller country than America, of course. But the courage of these people facing death, and they won't back down.
Same thing in Egypt, same thing we saw in Iceland.
Oh, same thing in Egypt. One other great example that back in 1968 in France, and I wrote about this, mostly in May in 1968, de Gaulle was the president then. They literally shut down the entire country. They brought the country to its knees with strikes, with street actions. It was nonviolent. Again, the energy waned, Michael. If they had kept that up, the unions were against them. The unions wanted to end this thing, but the people, students, workers, and other people joined them, elderly people. And again, the de Gaulle government was frantic. They didn't know what to do. If they had kept this up and not relented, I think at one time, I think at the height of it, 10 million French people were on the streets. I forget the population of France at that time, but that might be the equivalent today of 75 million Americans being on, maybe 100 million Americans being on the streets. I mean, an incredible turnout of people power, non-violently wanting their rights. And what do they want? They just wanted fairness. They wanted decent jobs, decent pay, decent benefits, decent government, what everybody deserves. We can have it if we will go to the wall and suffer over a short period by striking, by doing these things, and the payoff will be enormous. And I say all the time, Michael, if we don't care about doing this for ourselves, then do it for our kids. Because if we don't, they have no future. If you don't give a damn about your own children to go out and do this, then that is the future you will hand them, and you will be responsible for what they will face ahead. We have to do this.
We absolutely do, and we're almost out of time here, and I just want to wrap up on the situation. We're already suffering. We're already suffering. We're seeing the proceeds of a lifetime of work just being looted away from us to make the money junkies that much richer. And we understand the money junkies are addicts and they're never going to see reason. We have to bring this to an end ourselves. We did it before in 1776. We need to do it again, hopefully non-violently. But the reality is that the world cannot continue going on the way it's been going on for the last 100 years. There must be a major, major change. All right, we're running out of time here, so before we hit the commercial break, would you share your book and your website with all of our listeners, please?
Oh, well, my blog is simply Steve Lendman blog, Lendman, L-E-N-D-M-A-N. All my articles are there in chronological order. My own radio program on the Progressive Radio NewsHour.com, live and archived. is called the Progressive Radio News Hour, 3 times a week. I encourage people to tune in. You'll get this kind of discussion with the wonderful guests that I bring on, Michael. And my forthcoming book in September, again, is called How Wall Street Fleeces America, Privatized Banking, Government Collusion, and Class War. And there's full information on it on my blog site.
All right. Well, that sounds wonderful. Steve, thank you very much for spending time with us today, and I wish we had more time. I would like to have you back in the future as we continue to see this deterioration of the United States economy, because I sense it's accelerating, and I think we're heading to that final denouement of Wall Street.
Absolutely, Michael, and I'll be delighted to come back anytime.
Well, thank you very much.
All right.
That's the end of...
That was our interview with Steve Lendman, and very important issues there. Those Treasury bills that the government is selling to the Federal Reserve are redeemable only in the labor of the American people, and the U.S. government, in offshoring high-paying jobs, is devaluing your labor. So you now have to work harder to pay off the government's debt. Does that sound like good governance to you? We'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show here. The phone lines are open, 877-342-6673. We're live once again if you want to call in and join us here on the air. Interesting little story I put up at whatreallyhappened.com, and the headline reads, Federal Judge Upholds Same-Sex Marriage Ruling in California. And the first part of the copy is basically a federal judge on Tuesday dealt a blow to opponents of same-sex marriage by upholding an earlier ruling in favor of such unions, despite the revelation that the judge behind the earlier ruling is gay and in a relationship. Oh, horror and horror. A gay judge approved gay marriage. All right, now, this has nothing to do with gay marriage. Remember that what I was telling you a couple of weeks ago. The politicians who are in power now, the incumbents, cannot run on the economy. They cannot run for re-election on the economy. They cannot run for re-election on the wars, on the handling of the Gulf oil disaster, the handling of the Fukushima disaster, the handling of the Midwest flooding and western wildfires, the deteriorating infrastructure. They certainly can't run for 98% of America on how much they're willing to grovel before Israel. And so every election, the incumbents are going to try and create controversial issues. And then the media's job is to trick you into thinking these are what you should decide your votes on. And I said, one of the ones they will kick up again as we head into the 2012 election season is gay marriage. And sure enough, here it is. Controversial ruling. And it's not a controversial ruling. All the judge said was, we're just going to leave things as they are. And again, Rivero's rule of the news, and I guess we could expand it to say Rivero's rule of politics. If it doesn't affect your life, it's not news, and it's a distraction. Okay, and I understand this issue is important for the gay population, and I'm all in favor of same-sex unions. It doesn't make any difference to me. It really doesn't. But it doesn't affect my life. The economy affects my life. The wars affect my life. We just found out another one of our relatives is headed for convoy duty in Afghanistan. Those are the things that are important to America right now. The crumbling infrastructure, the continued looting of America to feed Wall Street and Israel, those are the issues of this election, or they should be. But politicians, being what they are, they're going to try and manufacture some kind of a controversy, get you all hot and bothered about that and say, this is what this election is about. It's family values. We can't have gay people having unions, blah, 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 blah. And they'll go off on that, and they will just go on to basically say, this is what this election is about. And it isn't. The election is about the economy. The election is about Wall Street corruption. The election is about groveling before Israel. It's about wars. It's about all of our young men and women being blown to bloody bits in a war to enforce private central banking on the rest of the planet. And that's a really dumb reason for our kids to be dying right now. So I brought this up only to point out that, yeah, I told you this is exactly what they were going to be doing. They're going to come up with all these little side issues and say this is what the election's about, because they certainly don't want you voting on the economy. They really, really do not. Now, Barack Obama is, of course, starting to basically go around and do his fundraising heading into the 2012 campaign season, and perhaps not too surprisingly, there are a lot of empty seats in his first fundraisers. And he's basically out there trying to recreate the energy of 2008. They got the same theme song, The City of Blinding Lights, and he's going out there and trying to basically go back and replay 2008, and it's not working. Because 2008, he was an unknown quantity, and he had a lot of potential, and we were all hoping. Now we understand there wasn't reason to hope, and he didn't bring any change. So there's no overflowing crowds. Okay, I see that. Now, an interesting little story. The British press is having a lot of fun with the fact that as part of their fundraising efforts, they were offering to allow you to have your picture taken with the First Lady for $10,000. And they're kind of poking fun at it. Would you pay $10,000 to have your picture taken with the First Lady? I certainly wouldn't. And Photoshop is much cheaper. And if it's okay for the White House to use Photoshop on Osama bin Laden for 10 years, then it must be cool for us to fake a Photoshop picture, us with Michelle, assuming you wanted one. Personally, I'd be leaning more toward Angelina Jolie, but that's just a personal little foible here. So Obama is already out there courting Puerto Ricans. Hi, guys, want to be a state? Vote me in. And a rather interesting little story, a quote came out in a story where Obama came out and said, my family would be fine with just one term in the White House. And I guess that makes it unanimous. Okay, Clint in Las Vegas. Aloha, Clint. Welcome to the show. What is on your mind?
What's on my mind? I wanted to talk about, I'm looking at Daily Paul right here, and they're talking about the polls that Ron Paul won by. And I just wanted to comment. You posted up there that CNN said he got 0%. So I figured they must have done it on these electronic voting machines.
I don't know. I think the Fox News people use a dartboard. You know, again, what we saw in 2008, they are not going to let Ron Paul get anywhere near the halls of power because he is opposed to the Federal Reserve, and he wants to put America first, second, and third, and that is what we need right now. In this time in history, we need politicians who are going to be worrying about this country first and foremost. I think it was Newt Gingrich was out there saying, if I'm elected president, I will move the U.S. Embassy in Israel to Jerusalem where it belongs. Boy, what a wonderful country we've got where that's the only thing that he's concerned about. And I'm sure the American people are going to want as the first order of business for their newly elected president to relocate Israel, America's embassy in Israel to Jerusalem. And the pandering, the blatant pandering to Israel and Jewish interests in this country has reached a point where ordinary Americans ought to be offended at how hard our politicians are screaming, I'm a better friend of Israel than you are. No, you're not. You're an anti-Semite. And they go, okay, guys, go argue over in Israel about whether you're a friend of Israel, because right now the United States of America needs Americans in political office. We don't need friends of Israel. I'm sorry?
Those guys got real low poll numbers, you know, all the pro-Israel guys. In fact, almost all of them did, except for Ron. I mean, CNN's own poll got 78%, and then they go on TV and say he got 0.
Well, the situation here is we've got such massive vote fraud in this country that it really comes down to a money game, and basically the American politicians are saying, we don't need you ordinary voters. If we can get enough money from Israel, we'll win the election anyway, because the media will support us, which is always pro-Israel, and we will have all this money and all this support from these electronic voting machines. That's how out of control the country is right now. And for Newt Gingrich to be making that really dumb comment, and you go around and you see all the, well, like Rahm Emanuel, who's the new mayor of Chicago, and he's out there talking about all this stuff in Israel, and you say, don't we have problems in this country with record homelessness, with record hunger and starvation and chronic unemployment? We're in the new Great Depression. Can't these politicians take a moment to look around at the people they're supposed to be working for? And the answer is no. We get Newt Gingrich talking about the location of the American embassy in Israel and the rest of this stuff. And we basically, get to this situation where it's obvious that federal government is more concerned with Israel than it is with the United States of America. And so as we head into this election season, the only voting advice I can give you is America needs leaders who will put America first, second, and third. And right now, except for Ron Paul, I don't see any. We'll be right back after these commercials. America, welcome back to the show here. And there is a bright spot in the news today. Pastor Harold Camping, who was basically screaming that the rapture was going to happen on May 21st, and then on May 22nd said, did I say May? I meant October, really. Apparently God is sick and tired of listening to this guy because he got a stroke today, and my sympathies go out to himself and his family. But it does sort of underscore the fact that maybe this guy did not have the inside track on the intentions of the Almighty as much as he would have thought. We have a T-shirt for sale over at our What Really Happened store, and I was looking forward to selling a lot of them come October, but obviously now that's not going to happen. But the T-shirt says in big letters, "The rapture did happen," and then down below it says, "You didn't make it." We're going to go back to the phones. We've got George in Texas. Aloha, George. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Yeah, you just segued what I was just talking about. I'm doing a little bit of homework, and I just found out like this pastor's ministry raked in $19 million in their IRS disclosure. And they have
I'm in the wrong line of work.
Yeah, and you know the thing is, and then I'm going through some of these charities where they say, we got to feed the hungry Jewish people in Israel and Eastern Europe, and it's like, and they're worth like millions of dollars, tens of millions of dollars.
And they're all tax exempt. They're all tax exempt.
And the thing is, and I'm just trying to tell people, you know, and this is where I'm coming from. I'm not going to say neglect donating to Michael Rivero, but I say to people, keep your charities local. We got plenty of need right here in our own country. I mean,
I just had this, excuse me for interrupting, I just had this flash of insight because we have all these charities saying, give us your money and we'll feed the people in Africa, or we'll feed the people in Estonia, or we'll feed the people in Israel, and all the rest of that. And yet, when you try and feed the homeless in this country, you get arrested. Is that sick or what?
Yes. And I just say, keep your charities local. I mean, you know, I just found like a church here. It's a Baptist church, but they do the money they do get. They go with local merchants. They work with local merchants. They buy food and get some other services like a little bit of gas money just so a person go out and look for a job or get clothes or get a haircut. I mean, they work with the local people, and you know, and it's like it puts a little money in the business's pocket. Hopefully, they could put another person back to work. I mean, you know, $19 million or $80 million in assets. You know how much of that money could be put back into our economy?
It would be nice if it would. But it is, like I said, you can get all these tax breaks and everything for sending money to Israel, but if you try and feed the homeless people in the streets of America, you're going to get arrested. And I know there's a lot of people, neighborhood-level groups that are trying to do something about it. My wife and I work with some of them around here. And it feels like an uphill battle. And you see these big, huge corporate enterprise so-called charities that are just raking in the money, and then you find out that very little of the money is actually going for any kind of charitable work, and mostly it's just all taken up producing more commercials and, you know, sending everybody around to, you know, the promotions and speaking and conventions. And some of these so-called charities are really not doing a lot of good work, but they pay their bills, they pay bribes to the appropriate politicians, and they're allowed to continue. And certainly, you know, a lot of these religious institutions are they're there to rake in the money. And, you know, you should see Vatican City sometime. They did not really build that out of their own pockets. That money came out of all these people around the world who thought they were helping somebody else in the world who was poor and in need. And instead, it's that huge pile of, and it's a beautiful place, don't get me wrong. It's a beautiful monument to our art and so forth, but it's also a monument to the enslavement of people by mythologies.
Well, you know, when I lived in Florida, you want to know what the most generous person was? He saw a need of a foster home, that kids needed clothes, you know, that house was substandard. And you want to know, on this foundation, the guy just cut a check right there because he felt compassion. You know what that person was? Stephen King. Stephen King.
Yeah, he does a lot of that stuff. He does a lot of that stuff. And he doesn't like a lot of publicity about it, which, to me, that's definitely the way to go. Too many people get involved in charity because they want it to come back and make them more famous, and it's a promotion thing. And I think the best charity is anonymous charity, and that's kind of the way my wife and I kind of deal what we do.
Hey, when you hear some actors, they have their own foundations, and they give themselves a salary of $100,000. I'm like, what? You know what I mean? I mean, if I was rich, if I had a foundation, I wouldn't pay myself.
Well, see, the problem is I'm always giving away what little money I have to help other people, which is why I'm going to be poor for the rest of my life, and I've just sort of accepted that as a permanent state of living. George, I got to let you go. We're running out of time, and I got a couple of things I want to cover before the end of the show today. And so thank you very much, and please call in again here. Yesterday we reported that Spanish authorities had arrested some of these hackers for the group Anonymous. And apparently Turkey today has arrested 32 people who are all part of this so-called hacktivist group Anonymous, who are out there threatening Ben Bernanke. Now, what's really interesting is that European computer security experts had come to the conclusion that these hacking attacks on the IMF and Sony and the rest of it have to be the work of a group that is backed by a nation state because of the sheer amount of resources required to be doing what they're doing. So I'm beginning to wonder if this anonymous group and this low security are fronts for government propaganda. Security experts are saying that it's most likely the United States or Israel who are behind all of this. And remember what I was saying last week about my concern about all this hacking activity that was happening as a justification for Obama's computer security initiative that he's going to be campaigning on next year. I will make your computers safe by completely reforming the Internet. So nobody's allowed to post online or have a website without a U.S. government license, and that way it will be safe for the children. And they'll basically turn the Internet into another corporate media content delivery network. It's just got a few more buttons and switches on it, but freedom of expression will be completely curtailed because the communication will no longer be interactive. It will simply be one way, from the government-approved media outlets to your pad, your tablet, your iPhone, whatever, and you're not really allowed to talk back. Even today, the comment boards on articles online are being heavily, heavily filtered, so that only people who are in agreement with the agenda are getting their word out. I cannot tell you how many places I've gone to post over the last couple of weeks to criticize comments made in the media, and for some strange technical reason, my posts are always being rejected. So, moving right along with that. In other news, let's see. Story where a man went into a diabetic coma, lost consciousness, and crashed his car into the front yard of somebody. The police show up and tase him. He's in diabetic shock, and they tase him. And at first I thought this was another example of dictatorship, and then I realized this is Obamacare. If you're not healthy, we will tase you until your health comes back. And I guess that's cost-effective here. Meanwhile, over in Ohio, everybody's favorite government agency, the TSA, found a bottle of liquid in this young woman's purse carried. They held this lady and her partner, and it turns out they were on their way to their honeymoon. They were newlyweds. She had contact lens solution, and TSA made them miss not only their flight, but their honeymoon cruise, because by the time they got to the steamship terminal, the ship had sailed. Thanks a lot, TSA. This is why people so want to come to the United States for their vacations, because they can't go anywhere, they can't do anything without being treated like POWs. As Ron Whitewood said, you're a bunch of manly men. You slapped around that newly married girl, and you showed her who's boss. And you taught her what life is like here in the United States of America. Isn't that amazing? Now, you want to know how sick this whole security thing is getting? There's a toy company that has now put out a toy security wand. You know, like they wave all over you to check for metal and hidden things. There's now a toy version in the stores for children, so children can grow up saying, yes, let me run my hands all over the parts of your body here. I guess this is from the same wonderful toy company that brought you the Waterboard Your Baby Brother playset. And they're planning before Christmas, they're going to have the TSA colorectal exam playset, rubber gloves not included, and the tragic Guantanamo suicide playset. Ooh, it's going to be so much fun. Is this really what we want our kids growing up to think is acceptable behavior? I have not been so disgusted since I saw the little pole dance kit for little girls at home to learn how to dance like the strippers do. Not that I have anything against strippers. But I think we should let kids stay kids as long as possible, because it's a one-way trip to adulthood. And if we're teaching little girls to be pole dancers and little boys to be TSA workers, And they grow up really fast, and then they can't go back. I think we have stolen something very, very precious from our children. When I was a kid, toys was a Meccano set or an Erector set or Lego blocks. Now we've got the anatomically correct wiener doll has hit the marketplace. This is sick. This is just sick stuff out there. No matter how cynical I get, I just can't keep up. All righty, let's see. According to Dr. Oppenheimer over at Cambridge University, volcanoes are the cause of anti-Semitism. I guess David Duke and Stormfront are off the hook. I mean, isn't that just anything to get anti-Semitism in the news again, because Israel obviously is taking a major, major hit in their public image, especially as we come up on this next flotilla. We're trying to get a representative of the U.S. boat that is going in this flotilla voyage to come on the show. We have not heard back from them yet, but we are trying to get them. Also, Ann Wright, who was on last year's flotilla, she was taken prisoner by the Israelis. She lives here in Hawaii. She's a wonderful, wonderful lady, excellent public speaker, definitely a woman who walks her talk, and we're trying to get her on the show as well. All right, looks like we're just about at the end of the show today, and one more time, I do apologize for all of our little technical glitches. I'm not sure if it's just Hawaiian Telephone's normal quality of service, or the hackers, they don't like me talking about them, or maybe it's sunspots, I don't know, but we're going to work on trying to get the service a little bit more reliable. We had about 6 days when it worked really great. Today, not so good, hopefully better tomorrow. Until then, stay safe, stay well, stay angry, stay skeptical. Hug your loved ones, drive carefully, and aloha, America.